God exist? It's a really good question. It's one that I've hoped you've asked yourself many times. It's one that I've asked myself many times. And it's one that I am continuing to investigate. And I've gone on quite a lengthy investigation of this question, and I found some very interesting results. And the arguments I present here are generic arguments for theism. They're not arguments necessarily for the Christian God. We can get into that later. But right now, these are just generic arguments for monotheism. But I believe that there are 4 arguments that hold much weight and are very powerful in proving the existence of a God. Now, the first one, and I think the most powerful one, is known as the cosmological argument. And it goes something like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. If you've ever watched William Lane Craig or some other famous apologists, you're very familiar with this argument. It's one that holds much weight, and it's in fact very valid. The first premise states, everything that begins to exist has a cause. This premise is largely unchallenged in science, as the law of causality states that every effect originates from a cause. Everything has a cause. You are the effect of a cause, your parents mating and a sperm and an egg meeting, resulting in a life. That is the cause to your effect. This is the oldest principle in the book, ex nihilo nihilo, out of nothing, nothing comes. Everything has an origin. Everything has a cause that begins to exist. Not anything that's eternal, but everything that begins to exist has a cause. This is the law of causality. It's a scientific principle. So we can firmly establish premise 1. But now we have to look at premise 2. The universe began to exist. And this is where there's quite some contention in modern debate today. Did the universe have a beginning, or is the universe eternal? And this is the point that is the most hotly debated of this whole cosmological argument. But I believe, and science supports, along with philosophy, that the universe did indeed have a beginning and is not eternal. And this is the opinion held by most Christians and atheists. Most hold to the belief that the universe did in fact have a beginning. But this premise is often challenged. So first, we will look at the scientific reasoning for why the universe had a beginning. And then we'll look at philosophical reasoning for why the universe could not be eternal. The second law of thermodynamics states that the universe is running out of energy. Everything goes from order to disorder. Take a look at an elderly person. Once they were young and vibrant and strong, and as they get older, their strength and their health starts to decrease. It's the second law of thermodynamics working upon them. Look at your house or your room. You clean it, and automatically it goes from order to disorder. It begins to get dust. It begins to pile up with dirt. It begins to get your car rust. It goes from order to disorder. This is the second law of thermodynamics working on us and on what we own. And it also works in the universe. The universe is running out of energy. The universe is going from order to disorder. This means that if the universe was eternal, it would have ran out of energy by now, which means you and I would not be here. The second law of thermodynamics also strongly points to there being a beginning, as it's working down from some point. It can't have an eternal point. It had to have a definite beginning point. The second reason to believe that the universe did in fact have a beginning is Einstein's theory of general relativity, which states that time, space, energy are all interdependent. They all had to come into being at the exact same time. And in fact, taking Einstein's theory of general relativity, mathematicians Alexander Friedman and George Lemaitre, they predicted using Einstein's theory equations that the universe did in fact have a beginning. And this was proven and legitimized when Edwin Hubble measured something called the red shift through his telescope. And this red shift established what the aforementioned mathematicians already discovered, that the universe didn't have an absolute beginning from a single point, known as the Singularity Theorem. It didn't come into being from multiple points. It, in fact, came into being from a single point, just as the biblical account of creation tells us. And thirdly, there's a third reason to believe that the universe did in fact have a beginning, and that is the Guth-Vilenkin theorem. So physicists Arvin Booth, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin found that the universe is expanding, and it's expanding at a pretty quick rate, and in fact is getting quicker. But that this expansion rate began at a single point. The universe began expanding from a single point, not from eternity past, but from a definite point in a beginning of the universe, which points to an absolute beginning of the universe. In fact, Alexander Vilenkin said that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There was no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. And of course, logic would state that the universe cannot cause itself. Something cannot cause itself. There must be a cause, and the universe is that effect. So let's look again at our argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. We have affirmed that principle. The universe began to exist. We have affirmed that premise. Therefore, the universe has a cause. The two premises that hold up the conclusion are airtight. We have seen, using science and seeing the law of causality, that these are both true and widely accepted by scientists today. Therefore, the conclusion that the universe had a cause is undeniable and most plausible. But what is that cause? In order for the universe to be caused, that cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and infinite, which is what God is: spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and infinite. So the cause of the universe looks a lot like God. But we don't have to stop there. There is good philosophical reasoning to believe that the universe had a beginning as well, as many will point to the fact that it's not impossible for the universe to have been infinite. Perhaps modern science points to it having a beginning, but we never know. Things could change over time. But philosophically, it doesn't matter what science discovers. It is impossible for the universe to be infinite. Infinity might be a theoretical concept, but in reality, it doesn't actually exist in time. There's no infinite amount of time. To show the absurdity of infinity, take the example of a hotel. Just call it the Grand Hotel. Say that in this Grand Hotel, there is an infinite number of rooms, and every single room in the hotel is occupied. So an infinite number of rooms, all of them are occupied. So an infinite number of guests occupying an infinite number of rooms. Now, say a new guest comes. He wants to check into this Grand Hotel. So the clerk says, no problem. We have an infinite number of rooms. She just moves over the person room number 1 over to hotel room number 2, so on and so forth, until there's enough room for this new guest to check in. But here's the logical problem. This guest was able to check in even though every single room was already filled. How can that be? It's logically absurd. Say that an infinite number of guests came to check into this hotel. And the clerk did the same thing as before. The guest in room number 1 moved over to room number 2, and so on and so forth, until there was enough room for an infinite number of people to come into this infinite number of hotel rooms. But here's a problem. Every single one of those hotel rooms was already occupied, being logically impossible, showing the absurdity of actual infinities. Furthermore, it gets even worse when people decide to check out. Say that everybody in the odd number rooms checks out and everybody in the even number rooms stays in. How many guests do you have remaining? Well, an infinite number of guests, because there's an infinite number of even rooms. But say that an infinite number of guests check out, except for guest number 1, 2, and 3. How many guests are left in the hotel? Now you only have 3 guests left in the hotel. So you took infinity minus infinity and got infinity, and then you took infinity minus infinity and got 3. Which defies the laws of mathematics, once again showing the absurdity of an actual infinity. There is huge problems with it. Take another example. If the universe is infinite, say that you have the sun, Saturn, and Jupiter. Say that Saturn orbits, for every one orbit that Saturn performs around the sun, Jupiter orbits 2. So for every one orbit of Saturn, Jupiter orbits 2, and this is just hypothetical, it's not actually true. But if it was an infinite universe, how many orbits would Jupiter and Saturn have both completed? Well, an infinite amount of orbits. They would have both the same amount of orbits, even though Jupiter orbits at twice the rate of Saturn. Once again, showing the absolute absurdity of infinity, which is why both scientifically and philosophically, we have good reason to reject the idea that the universe is infinite and that it did in fact have an absolute beginning, which points to it having an absolute cause, i.e. God. So now that we've established the cosmological argument, we can go into our second argument for the existence of God, the design argument. And this argument bears a lot of weight. Even prominent atheist Christopher Hitchens admitted this was the most powerful argument atheists have. And the design argument goes something like this. The universe is so finely tuned for life. The odds are so amazing. It must lead you to believe in a creator. Chance could not give us what we have, and physical necessity cannot give us what we have either. Therefore, we must have a creator. Let's look at some of the amazing numbers that the universe contains, the amazing odds against us for life. If the gravitational constant, or excuse me, if the force of gravity varied at all by 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, we would not exist. 1 in 10 to the 60th, that's 10 with 60 zeros. If the cosmological constant in the expansion rate of the universe was changed by just 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts, the universe would expand too quickly or too slowly, making life impossible to exist. If the mass of our universe were changed, we're not so evenly distributed as to 1 in 10 to the 10th to the 123rd power, life could not be. That is an unimaginable number, 1 in 10 to the 10th to the 123rd power. If that number changed remotely, life could not be. Even Stephen Hawking has admitted that the universe seems designed. Even Richard Dawkins has admitted that the universe seems designed, because it is indeed designed. The universe has been finely tuned for life, and the odds are unbelievable. It'd be like flipping a coin, not 1 billion times, not 100 billion times, but almost an unimaginable number of times and getting the same result each time. Sheer impossibility. Astrophysicist and cosmologist, Fred Hoyle said that the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question, that the universe is indeed designed. Psalm 19:1-2 declares that the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies declare his handiwork. And we can indeed see this from the design of the universe. The third argument we have for God's existence is morality. The fact that objective truth exists, and by objective I mean binding universal truth that is true no matter what area of the planet you grow up in, no matter what you are raised to believe, it is true and binding. For instance, slavery, when it was permitted in America in the 1800s, was still wrong, even though it was widely accepted. Truth, is it dependent upon people's standards or people's moral opinions or popular opinion? Truth is independent of all that, is transcendent and above us. But here's the problem. If there is no God, truth is merely a subjective matter. Your morality and my morality may be different. That's okay. Just you versus me. I like ice cream, you like vanilla. The Nazis felt that Jews were inferior and deserved to die. We don't. That's just a difference of opinion. If there's no transcendent standard by which to measure morality, then it is impossible to have universal binding truth. It's just a mere matter of opinion. But obviously, truth does exist. It's wrong to do certain things. It's wrong to murder people without cause. It's wrong to hurt children. It's wrong to do all sorts of heinous acts. Establishing the fact that indeed there must be a God. And a lot of people misunderstand this argument, saying that atheists can't be moral. No, that's not what the argument says. Atheists can be absolutely moral people. The argument says that there is no objective morality unless there is a transcendent creator, i.e., God, which of course morality points to their being. As you and I both know, hurting people just for fun isn't right, which points to the existence of a God. And our fourth argument is one that is purely philosophical and highly contentious and is not brought up often because it is a little hard to comprehend. But I've tried to make it as simple as possible because I think it's a very powerful argument. And it goes something like this. St. Anselm said, if it is even possible that God exists, then it follows logically that God does exist. And this is an interesting argument. At first may seem a little strange and peculiar. But think about it. God is a maximally great being. He's omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present. He is all good and all loving. That is a maximally great being. No greater can be conceived than that. And if it's at least logically possible for a maximally great being to exist, then the argument goes that he can exist. And this is why. In philosophy, there's something known as a possible world. In our world, the actual world, there's no unicorns, but it's at least logically possible for a unicorn to exist. So in a possible world, a unicorn exists. We don't have naturally born pink elephants in our world, but it's at least logically possible for elephants to be born pink. So in a possible world, pink elephants exist. Now, a square circle is not logically possible. So a square circle doesn't exist in any possible world because that world operates by the laws of logic. The smell of blue, there's no smell of blue. That's logically impossible. Color doesn't smell. So that doesn't exist in a possible world. It has to be logically coherent. So if it's at least logically coherent for God to exist, which no one will deny that it's at least logically possible for there to be a God, a maximally great being, then that God exists in a possible world. But if a maximally great being exists in a possible world, then he must exist in every possible world, because a maximally great being wouldn't just exist in one possible world. Him being maximally great would exist in every possible world. Therefore, we conclude that if he exists in every possible world, he exists in the actual world. And if he exists in the actual world, then he actually exists. And this argument has been hotly debated and defended by some very legitimate philosophers, such as Alvin Plantinga. And I suggest you read their literature. I suggest that after listening to this video, you consider all the arguments for God. We listed 4 arguments for the existence of God. The first one, the cosmological argument. The second one, the design argument. The third one, the moral argument. And the fourth one, the ontological argument. All of these give us justifiable reason for believing that God exists. And it seems increasingly unjustifiable to believe that God does not exist as science and philosophy progresses. Now, all of this knowledge is great, but in your heart, you have to decide not only to believe in a God, but to ask him into your life and to see to it that you have a relationship with him. And that's not for anybody to decide, that's up to you. But I pray that after seeing the evidence, you consider the possibility of God, and that you indeed put your trust and hope in the Savior, Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening, guys. See you.